Thank you. So now I have the distinct honor and privilege of introducing to you, many of you probably already know him, but I refer to him as the Reverend Dr. W.G. Hardy. Yes, many of you know him, yes, already. No introduction really is needed. So what I want you to know, there's just a few things I'd like you to know. Now, if you go to the hcclive.com website, which is the Highland Christian Community Center website, you will find about a 3-page bio. And it doesn't really do justice, but there's a number of accomplishments and awards and wonderful services that Reverend Dr. W.G. Hardy has under his belt, if you will. But I just want to point you to a few. Reverend Hardy is a native of Portland, Oregon. He is the senior pastor of Highland. And since 1996, actually. In 2000, Dr. Reverend Hardy formed a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation called Highland Haven. He's a visionary. He serves on a number of boards. He has the ear of important community leaders and politicians. He's won numerous awards, and he has a myriad of accomplishments. But a few notable mentions. Under his leadership, the African American Mental Health Coalition helped to open the Avo-Worthy Center for Healing through OHSU, which is a culturally specific clinic that serves folks of color, and it was really timely and much needed, so we really appreciate his leadership in doing that. Also under his leadership, currently, Highland has grown in its level of community service. And one of the things that they've done over this last year is partnered, again, under the strong leadership and vision of Dr. Hardy. They founded a partnership with Multnomah County for a warming center at Highland, where they've served a number of homeless children and youth. And we are pretty proud of that. And I am also proud to say that I am a member of this church. And I am very proud to learn from him and to glean from his wisdom. And I am again honored to, and that's just a little bit, that's only like a 10th or a 12th of his resume, but those are some of the important things I wanted to highlight today. But I'd like you all to join me in welcoming the Reverend Dr. W.G. Hardy as our speaker.
Alisha. It is really a pleasure to be here tonight, and I just know that this place would have been packed and full. However, there is another conflicting engagement where many are celebrating the retirement, so-called retirement, of the former Senator Margaret Carter. So all those people that aren't here, they wish they were. Okay? I'd like to say I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak and be the keynote speaker, because we have many things on the schedule. I'll make this brief. I started out early this morning speaking for the National Newspaper Publishers Association, and I saw John Jackley over there, so I think we're both keeping the same hours there. I've enjoyed Neil Kelly. I've watched you. I'm a native of Portland, Oregon. I grew up here, rode my bicycle in Northeast Portland, and I drive by all these places, these icons. And it's good to see all the gentrification and the movement of displacement, that there's still some landmarks that are there that are concerned about the community. Thank you for staying right where you're at. Well, she shared some things about who I am, but no one can speak about me better than I can. As Representative Richardson talked about his years of marriage, we wish him well in his run for governor. Those of you that have spoken before me, when I consider who I am a very proud native, not just Oregonian, but a Portlander. I remember when I grew up in this area, northeast Portland, not far from here, before this convention center, before the street was named Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, my father used to put up a yellow, white striped tent on Union Avenue, where Union and Freedom is. In the summer times, he would preach sermons and try to salvage lives who were so-called on Skid Row. It was a heavy population of African Americans that were there. I grew up in northeast Moreland until the age of 12. I had a strong sense of what it meant to be black. I went to Irvington grade school until the age of 12. And then when busing started in 1969, my parents chose not to bus us because they felt it was an inequality to take blacks out of their neighborhood, take them to the dominant culture, and then in the evening bring them back. Rather than integrating, it would create more trauma. He thought it would be more fair to have an exchange. If you really want to do this right, bring the kids from the outer in and the kids from the inner out. So he chose not to bus us. But as fate would have it, in December of the same year that they got bused, my parents moved to the very neighborhood that my friends were being bused to. Well, that was kind of traumatic as well, because now I get to see my friends when it's school time, but at 3:30 they would all get on the bus and leave, and it would be as though I were on an island in southeast Portland. But being 12 years old, I learned something. In Irvington and Northeast, I learned how to get along with blacks. When I moved to Southeast, I learned how to get along with whites. I learned that there's a total different culture between the two. My friend Mikey was my friend not because of choice, but he was the only kid left on my block I could play with. And after we got to know each other quite well, Mikey comes up to me and he says, "Willie, you're lucky." I said, "Why, Mike?" And he said, "Because you don't have to comb your hair." I have to comb my hair. Well, you're lucky. You don't have to wash your face. Mike! I have to wash my face. I learned something. We had made friends. We had established relationship. The risks of exposure and embarrassment were lowered, and we were able to have conversations without even calling them courageous conversations. Had we waited until we were in high school, living with those paradigms and those concepts, if he were to ask me that, he would have had to have a couple of beers first, and then make a statement like, "Hey, Willie, you're not like the rest of the blacks." But had I not grown up with him and being older, I probably would have thought, "You're a racist," and you had beer for me to find out you're racist. What I discovered was when you have conversations at early ages, you can learn about each other without preconceived notions. I noticed disparities though. At Irvington, we had bark dust, sawdust down on the playground. You'd climb, you'd play. We had basketball with chain rims, you know. We'd try to play basketball. It was kind of awkward and clumsy. When we moved to Southeast Portland and went to Creston, we had a swimming pool, we had a track, we had a dentist office right there at the school. The kids were getting regular checkups. We had materials, the classrooms were orderly. And I noticed that, without noticing it, there is a disparity between those who have and those who have not. Because I developed and grew in that culture, knowing the dichotomy of what it's like to be African American, what it's like to live in the European world, I leave and joined the United States Navy. I served for 5 years, aviation electronics technician. But I chose, rather than living in Coronado, California, to come back to Portland, because Portland is the place I love. When I returned back to Portland, I signed on with TriMet Light Rail in 1986, and they say, "We're going to put in the state-of-the-art light rail. We need people trained in electronics, so I signed on. And I worked my way literally from the basement to the top floor. I worked my way from graveyard shifts with Tuesdays, Wednesdays off into the position of an engineering training supervisor, writing apprenticeship programs, bringing people in, training people how to tear the train apart, put it back together again, troubleshoot the train. I assisted in doing that. The reason I was able to excel in that environment where there weren't that many African Americans is because I had a relationship with Europeans. I learned how to talk and be accepted. I learned how to sit at the table and be incorporated into it, filter into without being offensive. I learned how to speak a foreign language. But then I noticed something at TriMet. Up on the board, they would have these posters on the third floor about what they called habitual offenders. These were pictures of kids who were called fare evaders. After they didn't pay the fare, they developed a record. They developed a record of repeat offenders, and then they would be on the wanted board. I realized that a lot of these kids that were on the board had grew up in inner Northeast, had been moved to the numbers, and when they would come into the Northeast, like any kid, black, white, green, or polka dot, if you only have a couple of bucks left over at the end of your adventure, you're probably going to spend it on treats or candy and take a chance on the train. Do I have a church in here? And when these kids don't make good choices, but make the choices children make, I noticed these children were beginning what we call a criminal record. Trying to get minorities into the apprenticeship program, I saw the agencies advertise in the Scanner, the Portland Observer, maybe advertise on the Negro radio station. But my apprenticeship program attracted gays, lesbians, white women, white men, but we were still struggling on how to get African Americans involved in the rich American dream. Being bivocational, I adopted a church where I came to help a dying church, Highland United Church of Christ. When I stepped into Highland, they were preparing to close the doors down, and they asked me if I would come speak to the young people one Sunday a month for $25 a month. I came in, spoke to those church until they were going to close, but the more I spoke, the more people came, the more it grew. Kept growing till we outgrew that little 125-seated place. We moved into a 600-seating Alberta theater right on Alberta where they do last Thursday, so you know about that, don't we? Renovated that place, kept outgrowing that place, but we couldn't build there. And as all of this inner city was being moved out into the numbers, that's Gresham, Wood Village, Troutdale, Fairview, we ended up moving another 5 miles east, to what is now known as Highland United Church of Christ, a $6 million campus. I left TriMet. I gave up my retirement. I cashed in everything I could so I could pastor full-time. And my goal for pastoring full-time was to come back into the community and try to put back into the young people a dream, to prepare them so when apprenticeship programs opened up, they could fully participate in the American dream. I'd like to ask you a question right now. Put your thinking caps on. Imagine yourself in a university. You're paying good money. Scholarships, you want to make good so you get renewed next year. You take your final exam. By show of hands, how many of you in here would be totally happy if on your final exam you got 94%? Let me see your hands. All right, 94%. That's still an A. The last I checked, am I right about that, Reverend Chuck? Well, I didn't see all your hands go up. Let me check again. Some of you are overachievers. How many of you say 96 can't do, but 98% would work for me? How many 98? I'd be happy to get 98%. Now, if you raise your hand for 96, your hand should go up for 98 also. 98. It's very true. Many of us would have a sense of accomplishment, arrival, be proud to boast that on my final exam, I got 98, I got 96. Here's what I discovered. If you got 94%, that means you missed 6%. If you're willing to throw away 6% and be happy, that means you could literally eliminate 100% of the African Americans. As we address civil rights, the American dream, and feel like we have made a significant accomplishment. Because the African Americans in Multnomah County are only 6%. That means we can vote, we can negotiate, we can deliberate, and walk out of the room patting ourselves on the back. We addressed and fixed the issues for 94%. The 98% means the African Americans are only 2% of Oregon. So down in Salem, they can pat each other on the back, shake hands, and say, guess what? 98% of our Oregonians are doing well. And meanwhile, I can come home and see that 100% of the African American community has gone down the drain. Poor education, high unemployment, mental illness, physical illness, devastated marriages, poor parenting skills, lacking in all the areas that make us a full person. So when you ask yourself, what is the role of the Oregon League of Minority Voters? I read your mission, and your mission isn't so much about running out here, knocking on the African American door, nor the Latino door, nor the Native American, nor the Asian, but it's to motivate the masses, the dominant culture, to rise to the occasion and be noted that you cannot afford to eliminate 2% nor 6% of the Oregonians that need Oregon the most. I said I would be quick, and I shall be. PDC, we need you. Oregon League of Minority Voters, we need you. Kelly, we need you. The poor turnout tonight, let it not be an indicator of our will to address the issues so long as God has given us life, breath, and health. I'm going to close with this. I've been invited to a lot of boards. We sat on some together. And Oregon is known for saying we want to diversify our boards, we want color on our boards, we want ethnicity, we want gender diversity, sexual orientation diversity. So there was this highfalutin, high-powered corporate business that says, we're going to diversify our boards. So they opened up the doors, they did interviews, and they brought in an African-American woman. And they all sat around talking about, isn't it wonderful? We've now diversified our board. She comes in, she sits here, she's got all the credentials, she's got the pedigree. But her knowing it's a foreign environment, she's not so quick to speak up at the board meetings. Any sisters who have broken the glass ceiling, you know what I'm talking about. Yes. So now here she sits at the board, and they're having a conversation. And the conversation on this one day is, we've done an assessment, and we've discovered that our employees are very disgruntled. They get upset, they're bickering, they're arguing, they start their day off miserable. And so we did a survey. What can we do to increase and enhance the working environment to create better working relationships? You ready for this? Here's what they discovered. The people are upset because every time they get ready to come to work on the 3rd, 5th, 6th, 7th floor, they have to wait forever for their elevator. So they sat around and they said, let's do an assessment. And they said, you know what I think we'll do? And all these guys sitting around the table, all this testosterone, linear thinking, analytical minds. I think what we should do is put in an elevator. Should we put in an escalator for the first floor, kind of get rid of some of the traffic? Maybe we could stagger the times people come to work so we can get a better movement the utilization of these elevators. And they came to the conclusion, I think what we're going to do is put in 2 more elevators. And they did the cost analysis. And they're sitting there getting ready to vote on spending all this money to revamp and put in these 2 extra elevators. And as they're doing it, the chairman of the board decided there's somebody's voice that's not heard at the table. Paused for a moment and asked her, you've been around the table. Is there something you would like to say? She paused for a moment and said, thank you for asking. I think before you spend all the money on the elevators, why don't you consider putting mirrors on the wall on the first floor? And the chairman figured maybe he'd humor her. Maybe make her feel like she's part of the group. So they figured it's a minimal investment, so guess what they did? Threw some mirrors up. And they did another assessment. And guess what they found out? The people were happier. People were more delighted when they came to work, more cheerful, more outgoing. And when they stopped and asked the question, how did this happen? The answer was this. When the people sat on the first floor with nothing to do, waiting and watching the numbers tick down, they became more and more frustrated before they started their day. When they installed the mirrors, people could look at themselves, press it up, and do those type of things. What an inexpensive remedy to an expensive problem. When you ask the question, what does this mean? Margaret Mead said this, never doubt what a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can do to change the world. As a matter of fact, it is the only thing that ever has. As we include the minority voter, we will be better as a whole.